So these are the Sony WH-1000XM6s, and it really shows that Sony is listening because these address almost all of the hardware issues that I had with the Sony WH-1000XM5s. Most notably, the Sony WH-1000XM6s have brought back their foldable design, their ear cups are a little more spacious, and their headband has a little more surface area, so hotspots aren't as big of an issue. And more importantly, these block out more noise than the Sony WH-1000XM5s, which was already super impressive. However, there are some firmware issues here that are preventing these headphones from being perfect. Nonetheless, today we're going to check out the Sony WH-1000XM6s, and we're going to see how they compare to both the Sony WH-1000XM5s and the Sony WH-1000XM4s. And we're also going to be throwing in the Sony WH-1000XM3s and the Sony WH-1000XM2s for good measure. Regarding pricing, there has been another price increase here. The Sony WH-1000XM6s now have a retail price of $450, whereas the 1000XM5s had a retail price of $400 when they first came out, and the 1000XM4s had a retail price of $350 when they first came out. Nonetheless, I do expect these headphones to go on sale on a regular basis, so if you want to pick these headphones up, there'll be a link down below, or you can always press on the YouTube shopping button, and if you want to further support the channel, then you can always pick up some merch. So first, there's the case, because just like the headphones, this case has gotten an upgrade from its predecessor. Since the Sony 1000XM6s have a collapsible design again, like the XM4s and older, the XM6s now have a smaller case than the 1000XM5s, which have a lay-flat design to them, which means the XM5's case just had a very large footprint. Now, I've always said I love the performance of the 1000XM5s, especially when it comes to active noise cancellation. But since their case was just so big, these weren't my favorite headphones to fly with, because I felt that this case was just too cumbersome to travel with, especially if you have a really cramped backpack. But thankfully, the XM6's case is back in line with the XM4's case. But more importantly, this case is a hard shell case, so it's going to have no problem protecting your headphones if you're going to be storing them in a cramped backpack. And this case is decently thin as well. But something that's new is that the XM6's case now has a magnetic latch on it. So it's very easy to open and close, and since this latch is actually past the midpoint on the side of this case, this latch is actually very secure. However, if you're one of those crazy people that just attaches their headphones case to their backpack, and to me this just never makes sense because I just feel that it's very annoying to just have this thing swinging from your bag, and it also invites somebody to just steal your headphones, I would still be cautious because maybe this latch will open up if you're sprinting from one terminal to your next flight. Now, I've tried running and this case didn't open up, but I would still play it on the safe side. But as a normal person that just stores his headphones in his backpack or carry-on, having this magnetic latch is actually super convenient. But now let's talk about the headphones themselves. Design-wise, I love how the 1000XM6s look. The 1000XM6s share the same design language as the 1000XM5s, but they look sleeker and they're more low profile. But they share the same characteristics as the 1000XM4s and before, because they have a collapsible design to them again. Now, the ear cups on the 1000XM6s have a lot of range of motion to them, so they can pivot and swivel, and they're going to be able to rest on any head shape, and they're going to feel very natural doing so. And just like the 1000XM5s, the headband on the 1000XM6s glides in and out. But personally, I prefer when my headband clicks, like on the 1000XM4s and before, because this way I know that if I just extend each arm by 7 clicks, I know that I have my perfect fit every single time. But more importantly, if we move up the headband on the 1000XM6s, you're going to notice that this headband has more surface area than the headband on the 1000XM5s. And like I said from day one, I didn't like the slim headband on the 1000XM5s because this slimmer headband would lead to hotspots much quicker because this headband just had less surface area. But with the 1000XM6s, since this headband is wider, hotspots aren't as big of an issue because you have more surface area to disperse all of this pressure going on of the top of your head. However, I do wish that this headband had a little more padding on it, kind of like on the headband on the 1000 XM4s. And finally, there's the leatherette on these headphones. The 1000 XM6s are using very similar leatherette to the one found on the 1000 XM5s. It's soft, but there's a slight grain to it, and it kind of feels like soft touch, but with less friction. But more importantly, I think it feels better than the leatherette found on the 1000 XM4s, because I just feel that it feels very plasticky. But then there's just the overall durability of these headphones. Just like the XM5s, the XM6s are using a lot of recycled plastics, whereas the XM4s and before all used new plastic. So they have a slight slate finish to them, and they offer a lot of grip, but more importantly, I think we have to look at these hinges. Now, Sony's headphones have this reputation of usually breaking at the hinges because they're mostly plastic, and this was definitely a big issue with the XM5s. But with the XM6s, it looks like Sony went in and reinforced these hinges because we actually have metal arms now, unlike the hinges on the XM4s, which are just straight plastic. So here's hoping that this new reinforced hinge design will lead to better long-term durability on the 1000 XM6s, but this is something that only time and a large enough sample size will be able to prove. So this is just my warning. Sony's headphones have this reputation of having weak hinges, but it kind of looks like Sony is facing that head on with the 1000 XM6s and their new implementation of metal in these new hinges. But then there's the overall fit of these headphones. When it comes to clamping force, the Sony 1000 XM6s have a neutral amount of clamping force, but they do have a slightly firmer fit than either the XM5s or the XM4s, which means they aren't loose fitting like, let's say, Bose's headphones, but they aren't overly tight like, let's say, the Beats Studio Pros. The Sony 1000 XM6s offer a neutral fit, but they are a little tighter, but more importantly, they're still big head approved, and even if you like to wear hats, these headphones will have you covered. And like I mentioned earlier, since these ear cups pivot and swivel a lot, these headphones are going to sit very naturally on your head, and when they're on your head, they're much sleeker and they look much more low profile than the 1000 XM5s, which I personally really appreciate because I feel the 1000 XM5s just look super bulbous. And just like the 1000 XM5s and 1000 XM4s, the 1000 XM6s are very lightweight, weighing in at 254 grams, just like the 1000 XM4s, whereas the 1000 XM5s weigh in at 250 grams. Nonetheless, all of these premium ANC headphones are lightweight when compared to other ANC headphones out there. But more importantly, since the 1000 XM6s are so lightweight, they aren't super noticeable when you're walking around with them on because you don't feel them shifting around as much. And they're very easy to forget that you're wearing them if you're sitting at your desk or while in an airplane, or if you're just lying in bed. But then there are the ear cups on these headphones. Now, the ear cups on the 1000 XM6s have a very similar diameter to the ear cups found on the 1000 XM5s. However, the ear cups on the 1000 XM6s are a little more spacious than the ear cups on the 1000 XM5s because these ear cups actually push in a little bit. So the ear cups on the 1000 XM6s are going to be able to accommodate slightly larger ears or ears that stick out a lot more better than the ear cups found on the XM5s, which are very shallow, and this fluoride doesn't push in as much. But then there are the ear cups on the 1000 XM4s, and these ear cups are still way more spacious than the ear cups on the XM6s. For me, the ear cups on the XM6s fit me well, but I still prefer the roomier fit of the ear cups found on the XM4s. But more importantly, since the ear pads on the 1000 XM6s have so little surface area coming in contact with your skin, and since these ear pads aren't overly stuffed with padding, like with the ear pads found on the Ultra Wear, these ear pads actually do a really good job of staying cooler for longer. So overall, I really like the new design of the XM6s. They look much sleeker and more low profile than the XM5s, but they brought back the collapsible design of the XM4s, and I like that they increase the width of the headband from the XM5s, so this helps with hotspot prevention, and I like that they reinforce the hinges on these headphones. And the ear pads on the XM6s are more spacious than the ear pads found on the XM5s. But personally, I wish the ear pads on the XM6s were as spacious as the ear pads found on the XM4s, and I wish the XM6s had a little more padding on the underside of the headband like on the XM4s. But now let's talk about tech specs. Now, regarding battery life, the Sony WH-1000XM6s have an advertised battery life of 30 hours with their ANC turned on, and with their ANC turned off, they can go for as long as 40 hours. So battery life on the XM6s is the same as the XM5s and XM4s, and in general, this is a little above average. Overall, battery life on the XM6s is still very good for headphones in 2025, but for the XM7s, I would like to see a meaningful battery life increase. I would like to see 40 hours with ANC turned on. And in order to charge these headphones up, they charge via a USB-C port as they should, but something that is new for the XM6s is that you can now use these headphones while they're charging, which is actually a pretty big deal if you plan on using these headphones as a gaming headset. And when it comes to fast charging, if you were to charge these headphones up from a dead battery for 3 minutes, you're going to get 3 hours of playback time, so 1 minute, 1 hour. Not bad. However, you can't use the USB-C port on these headphones as a wired connection. But more importantly, these headphones do have a 3.5mm audio jack, and they come included with an audio cable. So you can use these headphones with the entertainment system on an airplane, and you can still use these headphones passively, which is good if you're flying or if you plan on using these headphones for content creation. And when it comes to Bluetooth connectivity, these headphones can be connected to any two Bluetooth devices at the same time, which is very good if you're a power user, because you can easily hot swap from one device to another regardless of ecosystem, and latency is not an issue for these headphones, so you can use them to watch the videos with on your phone. And when it comes to audio codecs, the XM6s have support for SBC, AAC, and LDAC, which is Sony's own in-house high-res audio codec. Just keep in mind that if you do want to use LDAC, you do have to be an Android user because iPhones stop out at AAC, and if you do use LDAC, that is going to take an additional toll on the battery life, because with the ANC turned on and with LDAC turned on, your battery life is going to go from 30 hours of playback time to 26 hours of playback time. But wait, if you want to further support the channel, then check out our partners over at Factor. Factor ships chef-cooked meals right to your door, which are genuinely very tasty, they're healthy, and they're super easy to prepare, and cleanup is super easy as well. You can choose from 40 different meals a week, and you can sort through them by preferences or dietary needs. Personally, I'm a fan of the Tex-Mex beef bowl. It's hearty and spicy. The chimichurri chicken breast is super tasty and macro-friendly, and the honey butter chicken breast with mashed potatoes are perfect for when you need something warm and comfy. So click on our link down below and get 50% off on your first order, and you're gonna get free shipping for life, and you're gonna get 2 free add-ons for life as well. I actually went with the wellness shots. Factor makes it very easy to eat good, save money, and save time. But now let's talk about actually listening to music with these headphones. Now, the Sony WH-1000XM6s sound good and they get the job done. The Sony WH-1000XM6s actually sound very similar to the WH-1000XM5s in the sense that they have much better instrument separation than the WH-1000XM4s, and they also do a much better job of focusing on the vocals. Vocals are very prominent on these headphones, but the problem with the WH-1000XM6s is that they somehow have a less bass than the WH-1000XM5s. So with the WH-1000XM6s, they sound good, open, and detailed, but they're just kind of missing some fun because the bass on these headphones isn't going to kick or resonate like with a lot of other headphones out there. And with the WH-1000XM6s, they no longer have a dedicated clear bass slider like with either the XM5s or the XM4s. Now, you can go in and adjust the EQ on these headphones, but I don't like using a custom EQ on the XM6s because it sounds like they lose a lot of their instrument separation and openness. And even if you were to go in and raise the bass on the XM6s, this bass doesn't perform like the bass on the XM4s, and more importantly, like I just mentioned, they somehow lose some of their instrument separation. So overall, I think the Sony 1000XM6s get the job done. They sound good because they have really good instrument separation, they sound very open, and the vocals on these headphones are very prominent, just like with the 1000XM5s. But since these headphones have even less physicality in their bass than the 1000XM5s, they aren't as dynamic or as fun to listen to. And if I had to choose, personally, I still prefer to listen to music and watch movies with the Sony 1000XM4s. Now, the 1000XM4s don't have as good instrument separation as either the XM5s or XM6s, and admittedly, they can sound a little shallow at times by comparison, but since the bass on these headphones is a little more dynamic and you can actually get some tickles when the bass starts resonating, I feel that it's more fun to listen to music with the XM4s because they make you feel like you're in your music, whereas with the XM6s, they're just a little too subdued and they're a little too afraid to bend the rules, and they strictly color within the lines. So I'm not saying that the Sony 1000XM6s sound bad, I'm just saying that I prefer how the 1000XM4s perform over the XM5s and the XM6s. Now, when it comes to the MIDI controls on these headphones, just like with Sony's other headphones, the XM6s have a touchpad. You can double tap to play or pause your music, you can swipe front or back to skip through your music, and you can swipe up or down to adjust your volume. And a pro tip, if you were to swipe and hold, you can continuously raise or lower the volume. And overall, these touchpads are very accurate and they're easy enough to use. But also, just like with Sony's past XM5s and XM4s, the 1000XM6s still have wear sensors, so they're going to automatically play and pause your music when you put them off or when you take them off. And they're actually very fast to react, which is good, but if you don't want to use the wear sensors on these headphones, then you can always turn them off like I do. And the 1000XM6s actually have a few more gimmicks up its sleeve as to how you can actually interact with these headphones, because these headphones do have gesture controls, so you can nod yes or no to accept or reject phone calls, and these headphones also do the whole head tracking thing if you're going to be listening to 360-degree audio formats. And with the XM6s, they actually have their own built-in voice commands, so you can say, hey headphones, lower the volume, or you can say, hey headphones, noise cancellation turned on. But overall, these are just extra gimmicks that I also just turn off. But now let's talk about the active noise cancellation on these headphones. Now, for the last few years, the Sony 1000XM5s have been the king of active noise cancellation because they managed to block out the most amount of noise with the least amount of cabin pressure. And both the 1000XM5s and 1000XM4s were the best ANC headphones to fly with because thanks to their built-in atmospheric pressure sensors, they were able to block out way more noise than other premium ANC headphones while at cruising altitude. But now we have the 1000XM6s, which first off have a new QN3 chip for active noise cancellation, and they now have a total of 12 built-in microphones versus the XM5's 8 microphones and the XM4's 4 microphones. And I can confidently say that the 1000XM6s block out noticeably more noise than both the XM5s and XM4s, and they do so with minimal cabin pressure. But so that you can see for yourself, we're going to go ahead and jump into an ANC test, and we're even going to be including both the 1000XM3s and the 1000XM2s in this test. And yes, all of these headphones have been calibrated for this ANC test. So like we've just seen, this ANC test is pretty straightforward. As you move down the list, these headphones are able to block out more and more noise. However, what's super impressive is that the additional amount of noise the XM6s are able to block out compared to the XM5s is actually super noticeable. If you were to compare the XM4s to the XM5s, the difference is marginal. But if you were to compare the XM5s to the XM6s are just able to block out much more of those higher frequency sounds. So when it comes to road noise, there's less of that higher end hum, and when it comes to blocking out chatter, people's voices are just more effectively blocked out. Now, another thing with both the XM5s and XM6s is that they're constantly calibrating themselves depending on your wearing position and atmospheric pressure, i.e. if you're on the ground level or if you're cruising altitude while flying in an airplane. Whereas with the XM4s and older, you constantly have to go through the calibration process if you want the best ANC performance. And this is something that you should definitely go through when you're at cruising altitude and you want to go through that calibration process again once you land. Now, I know that this sounds like a whole lot of marketing fluff, but the atmospheric pressure sensors on Sony's 1000X series of headphones just made both the XM5s and XM4s the best ANC headphones to fly with, because while at cruising altitude, both the XM5s and XM4s were able to block out way more noise than, let's say, the Bose QC Ultra, Bose QC headphones, AirPod Max, or Sennheiser Momentum 4s. And I expect the Sony 1000XM6s to also perform extremely well while at cruising altitude, thanks to the built-in atmospheric pressure sensor on these headphones as well. And rest assured, we will be publishing that test in a separate video soon. But overall, yes, the Sony 1000XM6s are able to block out even more noise than both the 1000XM5s and 1000XM4s, and the active noise cancellation improvement on the 1000XM6s is pretty significant, even if you were to compare them to the 1000XM5s. And thanks to the built-in atmospheric pressure sensor on these headphones, these are poised to continue to be the best ANC headphones to fly with if you want to block out the absolute most amount of noise. And then there's the ambient mode on these headphones. Now, just like with Sony's other ANC headphones, you can adjust how much noise they let in, and you can also set it so that they just block out noise pollution but let in people's voices. But if you're planning on running through an airport terminal with these headphones, I do recommend that you let in everything so that you can understand what they're saying over the loudspeaker. But the important thing here is the ambient mode on the XM6s also sounds more clear and more natural than the ambient mode on both the XM5s and XM4s. It doesn't sound as natural as the ambient mode on the AirPod Max, but it's super close. But more importantly, the microphone array on these headphones also does a very good job of rejecting wind noise when walking outdoors. But something that's really disappointing about the 1000XM6s is that their ambient mode doesn't do as good of a job of blocking out sudden loud noises like sirens. And this is very disappointing because both the XM3s and XM4s are able to do this without any problems, but both the XM5s and XM6s still can't manage to get this right. But let me just show you, and this is just your huge headphone warning. So like we've just seen, the XM6s don't even react, they just let in everything. And even if you were to set them to auto ambient mode and set them to high sensitivity, they don't block out the noise, like this. So in the second demo, the XM6s reacted a little, but then they just let everything back in again. Whereas with the XM5s, they actually react, but they turn off their ambient mode on and off and on and off like this. So, like you may have just seen, the XM5s actually reacted, but they still weren't able to execute this properly. But then there are the XM4s, which actually get it right, like this. So like you just saw, with the XM4s, when they detected that loud sound, they turned off their ambient mode and it stayed off until that loud sound stopped. And this is super important to prevent your ears from getting blasted if you're walking outdoors and a siren rolls by, or if your dog starts barking. And I just don't get why Sony hasn't been able to get this right after the XM4s came out. So I really hope that they can fix this through a firmware update, but right now I don't have high hopes because I've been saying the same thing with the XM5s and they still perform the same since day one. Now, I know that I'm being very nitpicky here, but since the Sony 1000 XM6s are a pair of very premium ANC headphones and they have gotten a price increase from the XM5s, I think that it's fair to expect good execution, especially when it comes on the software side. But also, the 1000 XM6s have speak to chat, which can also be found on both the XM5s and XM4s, and it works a little like this. Hello there. So this is speak to chat. Basically, when you start talking, these headphones will automatically lower the volume of your music and they'll automatically pump in all of the ambient sound around you so that you can quickly talk to someone without even to have to touch these headphones themselves. Now, these headphones will stay in this state for a preset determined amount of time, or you can always adjust that through their app, or you can always manually cancel speak to chat by double tapping on the touchpad like this. But personally, I'm not a very big fan of speak to chat because it's very easy to accidentally activate it. If you're talking to yourself very quietly, that can activate it. If you're singing along to your music, that can activate it. If you start laughing, that can activate it. And on rare occasions, loud enough outside sounds can activate it as well. So that's why I don't use it. However, something that I don't like is that with the XM6s, you can no longer toggle speak to chat directly from the headphones themselves by pressing and holding on the touchpad with 2 fingers, whereas with both the XM5s and XM4s, you can toggle speak to chat on and off by just pressing and holding on the touchpad with 2 fingers. So I really hope that Sony brings this feature back on the XM6s through a firmware update. And personally, I still prefer to use quick attention on these headphones because it's a lot more intentional. When you fully cover the touchpad on these headphones, they're going to lower the volume of your music and pump in all of the ambient sound around you like this. And when you let go, the headphones will go back to normal again. Now, like I said, I prefer quick attention over speak to chat because it's a lot more intentional and this feature is extremely useful, especially when you're flying with these headphones. But I still feel that Sony should change it so that when you have this touchpad covered for like 5 seconds or more, they should lock themselves in this state so that you can let go. Because keeping your arm up like this can get uncomfortable and awkward after a while. And again, this is something that they can change through a software update. And finally, here's the microphone test. And Sony has also been progressively improving the microphone on their headphones. And up until recently, I think the Sony 1000 XM5s had one of the best performing microphones because it sounds very good while in a quiet room, and this mic also does a great job of dealing with noise pollution. But with the Sony 1000 XM6s, unfortunately, this microphone isn't as good as the microphone found on the Sony 1000 XM5s. Even though the 1000 XM6s are using 6 beamforming microphones versus the XM5s 4 beamforming microphones. Now, while in a quiet room, the microphone on the Sony 1000 XM6s sounds very similar to the microphone found on the Sony 1000 XM5s, and it sounds a lot better than the microphone found on the Sony 1000 XM4s. But when it comes to blocking out noise pollution, I don't know what's happening here because these are just letting in all over this road noise, and there is a significant amount of interference going on my voice. Whereas with the Sony 1000XM5s, these are doing a much better job of dealing with this noise pollution. Because if we were to switch over to my lapel microphone, you're going to clearly hear all of this road noise. But if we were to switch back over to the Sony 1000XM5s, it is severely reduced, and there is minimal interference going on with my voice. The only positive thing that I can say is the Sony 1000XM6s don't sound as bad as the Sony 1000XM4s when it comes to blocking out road noise. And when it comes to blocking out chatter, the Sony 1000XM4s really struggle here as well because they're just letting in everything. And I'm sad to say that the Sony 1000XM6s are really struggling here when it comes to blocking out this chatter because there is a significant amount of interference going on my voice when I'm talking. But the good thing here is at least this microphone does mute itself when I stop talking like this. And then when I start talking again, you're going to start hearing all of that interference going on your voice again. So this is a bit of a problem with the Sony 1000XM6s right now. Whereas with the Sony 1000XM5s, these are doing a much better job of dealing with this chatter because again, for comparison's sake, if we were to switch over to my lapel microphone, you're going to clearly hear all of this chatter. But if we were to switch back over to the Sony 1000XM5s, it is severely reduced. Yes, there is a little bit of interference on my voice, but the chatter is actually blocked. So personally, I am very disappointed to see that the mic on the Sony 1000XM6s doesn't perform as well as the microphone found on the Sony 1000XM5s. And I really hope that Sony fixes this as well through a future firmware update, and they need to do that fast. But with all that being said, the Sony WH-1000XM6s are good, but there are certain things that are preventing these headphones from being exceptional. But some of these things can be fixed through a firmware update. First off, I like that Sony listened and they brought back the collapsible design to the Sony 1000XM6s, which also means we get a smaller and more convenient case again, which is great for flying, and the magnetic latch is a nice touch. I really like it. And overall, I like the look of the 1000XM6s, but personally, I still find the 1000XM4s to be more comfortable than the 1000XM6s thanks to their more spacious ear cups and better padded headband. But when it comes to active noise cancellation, you cannot deny that the Sony 1000XM6s block out noticeably more noise than both the 1000XM5s and 1000XM4s. And thanks to the built-in atmospheric pressure sensor, the 1000XM6s are poised to be the best ANC headphones to fly with because they'll be able to block out the most amount of noise while at cruising altitude. The ambient mode on these headphones also sounds supernatural. However, I really need Sony to go and adjust the ambient mode on these headphones so that they will actively and properly block out sudden loud sounds like the Sony 1000XM4s. If the Sony 1000XM3s and the Sony 1000XM4s can get this right, there's no excuse why the Sony 1000XM5s and Sony 1000XM6s can't get this right as well. And while Sony's at it, they need to fix the microphone performance on the Sony 1000XM6s as well. The microphone on the 1000XM6s sounds good while in a quiet room, but these don't block out noise pollution as well as the 1000XM5s. And again, if the 1000XM5s can get this right, the 1000XM6s should as well. And finally, there's the sound. The Sony 1000XM6s sound good. They sound very open, they have great instrument separation, and vocals are very prominent on these headphones. But I'm missing the kick in the bass, so the Sony 1000XM6s aren't as fun as the Sony 1000XM4s. And I'm not asking for an unreasonable amount of bass like on the Ultwear. I just need enough so that I can get a little bit of tingling down my spine. But regardless, the Sony 1000XM6s are a great option to consider if you're planning on flying a lot with your headphones, because these things genuinely block out a lot of noise, and thanks to their new old design, they now have a smaller case again, which is a lot more comfortable for traveling. But what Sony really needs to do ASAP is fix the microphone performance on these headphones, and if they can fix the active ambient mode on these headphones while they're at it, that'd be nice too.
If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit the like button and get subscribed. If you want to pick any of the products up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And you know I can be very particular, so I'll only slap my name on something if I'm really proud of it.